So we're in the season of Advent, and I wanted to again thank Renee for last week. She shared the first candle of peace, and as I recalled, it was integration and wholeness. This idea that God is reconciling these broken pieces of this world back to himself, where heaven and earth would become one, and there'd be no more tears and no more suffering and no more pain. And so we were focused on preparing ourselves for that coming time. This week, we're going to be focusing on hope. And the texts that were used are to remind us that we're not there yet. The kingdom of heaven has not completely come. Although Jesus has done the work, it has begun. We're still in a broken place with broken systems and things and people, and that we're not home yet. And so part of Advent is preparing ourselves, getting ready, making room, intentionally setting aside pieces of our heart and our time, so that as these conduits, these paths of peace, paths of least resistance for the Prince of Peace, a lot of P's, paths of peace, we can take that in and become whole and integrated and a part of the kingdom that is coming on earth. Hebrews 11:1. It's been probably my favorite verse this season. It says that faith shows us the reality of what we hope for. Faith shows us the reality of what we hope for. It is the evidence of things we cannot see. There's the wind, there's hopes and dreams. There are things that are abstract, but there is evidence for these things, and the proof that is in them. The very fact that you have this hope in your heart for justice and love and mercy, the very fact that that is in you and that you have a knowing that that's a possibility, that is evidence of this hope that we have. As with Renee, we're going to be following the Bible Project's video on peace, this week on hope. So I'm going to start with that and we'll come back, okay?
So let's say you want to describe the feeling of anticipating a future that's better than the present. You might be giddy or excited or maybe unsure, but most of us know that experience. We call it hope. It's a state of anticipation, and it's crucial for healthy human existence. And it's a really important concept in the Bible. In fact, there are many words for hope in the ancient languages of the Bible, and they're all fascinating. In the Old Testament, there are two main Hebrew words translated as hope. The first is yachal, which means simply to wait for. Like in the story of Noah and the ark, as the flood waters recede, Noah had to yachal for weeks. The other Hebrew word is kavah, which also means to wait. It's related to the Hebrew word kav, which means cord. When you pull a kav tight, you produce a state of tension until there's release. That's kavah, the feeling of tension and expectation while you wait for something to happen. The prophet Isaiah depicts God as a farmer who plants vines and kavahs for good grapes. Or the prophet Micah talks about farmers who both kavah and yachal for morning dew to give moisture to the land. So in biblical Hebrew, hope is about waiting or expectation. But waiting for what? In the period of Israel's prophets, as the nation was sinking into self-destruction, Isaiah said, "At this moment, the Lord's hiding his face from Israel, so I will kavah for him." The only hope Isaiah had in those dark days was the hope for God himself. You find this same notion of hope all over the book of Psalms, where these words appear over 40 times. In almost every case, what people are waiting for is God. Like in Psalm 130, the poet cries out from a pit of despair, "I kavah for the Lord, let Israel yachal for the Lord, because he's loyal and will redeem Israel from its sins." Biblical hope is based on a person, which makes it different from optimism. Optimism is about choosing to see in any situation how circumstances could work out for the best. But biblical hope is not focused on circumstances. In fact, hopeful people in the Bible often recognize there's no evidence things will get better, but you choose hope anyway. Like the prophet Hosea, He lived in a dark time when Israel was being oppressed by foreign empires, and he chose hope when he said God could turn this valley of trouble into a door of hope, like the day when Israel came up from the land of Egypt. God had surprised his people with redemption back in the days of the Exodus, and he could do so again. So it's God's past faithfulness that motivates hope for the future. You look forward by looking backward, trusting in nothing other than God's character. It's like the poet of Psalm 39 who says, "And now, O Lord, what else can I kavah for? You are my Yachal." In the New Testament, the earliest followers of Jesus cultivated this similar habit of hope. They believed that Jesus' life, death, and resurrection was God's surprising response to our slavery to evil and death. The empty tomb opened up a new door of hope, and they used the Greek word elpis to describe this anticipation. The Apostle Peter said that Jesus' resurrection opened up a living hope, that people can be reborn, to become new and different kinds of humans. More than once, the Apostle Paul says the good news about Jesus announces the elpis of glory. In both cases, this elpis is based on a person, the risen Jesus, who has overcome death. And this hope wasn't just for humans. The apostles believed that what happened to Jesus in the resurrection was a foretaste of what God had planned for the whole universe. In Paul's words, it's a hope that creation itself will be liberated from slavery to corruption into freedom when God's children are glorified. So Christian hope is bold, waiting for humanity and the whole universe to be rescued from evil and death. And some would say it's crazy, and maybe it is. But biblical hope isn't optimism based on the odds. It's a choice to wait for God to bring about a future that's as surprising as a crucified man rising from the dead. Christian hope looks back to the risen Jesus in order to look forward. And so we wait. That's what the biblical words for hope are all about.
It might look crazy. I love the line. Psalm 135 through 7, waiting. I am counting on the Lord. Yes, I'm counting on him. I've put my hope, that's the Yachal, wait, in his word. I long for the Lord more than the centuries long for the dawn. Those are the soldiers that keep watch at night. So I long for the Lord more than the centuries long for the dawn. Yes, more than the centuries long for the dawn. O Israel, hope in the Lord. For with the Lord there is unfailing love, and his redemption overflows. We wait in his word. All of the small groups that we are a part of are focused on God's word. He has given us and delivered to us a written collection of stories of God's people who are in this still broken world and still had this deposit of hope that they received in their hearts, believing that what God had said he would do. And that hope and that written word is a compilation of these people's struggles with that process. Because oftentimes, at least for my time on the planet, I've believed God was going to do something, and then something else happened. And so was it that he didn't do it, that he didn't promise it, or was there something else going on? And there's a whole lot of tension. That's the kavah part, where you're stretched, your hope is stretched beyond what you feel you can bear. And then at some moment in time, God releases just enough so that you can relax and you can refresh and you can believe. We wait in his word. Again, these are his promises that he will deliver. And we believe that this collection of stories was inspired for us to learn from. And these stories are rich in God's faithfulness, how God intercedes and continues to do exactly what he intends. And it's also a collection of these stories that we dive deep into the human condition, into our frailty, into our brokenness, into our propensity, our tendency to fall away or to get distracted. So we wait in his word, and we wait in the Lord. In him we live and breathe and have our being. It's said in Scripture that that's where we gain our strength. That's where we gain our breath. Every perfect, good and perfect gift comes from him. And so in him we live and breathe and move and act. He is the animation or the animator of our avatar. While all things are made by him and contain his fingerprints, so the world around us is made by him and contain his fingerprints. He is not in those things. He doesn't inhabit those things, but his fingerprints are on them. And so all of creation is waiting for that with eager anticipation for him to return. He answers us when we ask questions. He answers us when we ask questions. While we're waiting, while we're in this tension, we can ask, how long, O Lord? Are you sure this is what you want? We can ask, and he will answer. He guides us when we're seeking direction. God, show us what we should do. Guide our steps. Order our steps. Allow us to know your path that you'd have for us. And he'll guide us in that. And he opens the doors of opportunity, and those doors lead us to an adventure when we knock. Oftentimes there are these doors. He waits for us on one side for us to open our hearts for him to enter. But once that has happened, then he'll establish doors in front of us where we have to knock on that door and sometimes put our hands on it and turn it. And he doesn't force us. He doesn't coerce us. So he answers when we ask. He guides us when we seek. And he opens the doors of opportunity to this adventure when we have the courage to knock. So we wait in his word, and we wait in the Lord. And then, as it just said in the video, we look back to look ahead. We can learn from those who came before us. We don't have to go blindly into these difficult decisions. Remembering what God has done already will help us to carry us further into the future. The Red Sea, the raising of the dead, the healing of the sick, the savings of nations and countries. All of those, again, in the book of Hebrews, they're great stories of people, men and women of faith, who followed this God and the Spirit that led them. We have these ancient stories of his faithfulness. We have beautiful stories in our generation. And we also have our own unique stories that we're in the middle of walking them out. So if you look on the back side of your sheet, I have a question. I've talked with several of you about this, but is there anything more real than pain, suffering, and cruelty? And why I'm asking the question is, when you're in the middle of pain, suffering, and cruelty, nobody questions that's not real. So when your leg is broken, you don't think, oh, this is just some manifestation of some pretend thing that's happening, okay? Like what people do when you talk about God and they're not in pain and suffering. Sometimes they say, oh, that's just fantasy. That's just made up. It's not concrete. It's not real. So my question is, if most people, and I think it's almost a universal, would recognize that pain and suffering and cruelty is real, there's substance to it, then is there anything more powerful than that? Can we only be driven by pain, suffering, and cruelty? Is that the only thing that could lead us? And my answer is yes, there is something more powerful, and it is hope. It is. It's something that can transcend these three things. What does transcend mean? It rises above. It's more powerful than those three things. It's men and women who will not yield in the face of pain and suffering and even cruelty. So if you buy that, I also want to suggest that you can't connect with that transcendent power until you experience pain, suffering, and cruelty. And it's only to the degree that you suffer this. For many years, I spent my life trying to avoid these things. Drugging, drinking, any excuse, pretending, oh, that didn't hurt, or that's not real, or that didn't happen. And it was only to the degree that I was able to accept the reality of those three difficult things that I was able to transcend above them, beyond them. You have to submit yourself to those first three things. Accept them. Whether you want them or not, that's not the question. It's an inevitability on this planet right now. Again, Ed, whose birthday is Wednesday, little hint that you should come, says that acceptance precedes change. And I hated that because it's true and it's hard and it's difficult. So you have to open yourself up to the possibility that there's something beyond your misery. You have to be open that there's something more powerful beyond your misery. And it's then that we cry out for rescue. Again, there's all these metaphors, your bottom, I've reached rock bottom, this is as bad as I could get. I never thought I would go this low. You've heard me say all of these things, and they're all true. But it's from there that we cry out and we can connect to that transcendent power. And you have to submit. You have to surrender. You have to let go. This is a quote from Jordan Peterson. I don't have it on the screen. It says, those who have been brought low enough. He's talking about blessings. How do you receive that transcendent power? How can you be open? How can you become the path of least resistance? He says, those who have been brought low enough, humbled enough, are then able to receive. If you're in trouble, if you're stuck, and you don't know how to get out, I suggest that is your greatest hope. Because if you knew, you would have already gotten out on your own. There's another quote. Modern men and women do not see God because they do not look low enough. They're not humbled enough. They haven't accepted enough. So I don't know if you noticed, but I cheated us out of a song. I have it held back in case. But I've got two stories I'm going to ask you to be open to. I'm going to start with Renee's first. And these are stories of hope.
All right. So many of you were here when in 2016, Ezra's birth was imminent. Perry and Andrea were on vacation. Perry was on sabbatical. And on June 9th of that year, in that month, my husband died. He was a man with a cardiac team and a great love of the table. So we knew, and we talked about it, but it was completely unexpected. Very quickly, I just wanted to be submersed in my pain. I remember sharing with my daughter, who, thank goodness, is a trained therapist, that I wanted to jump off a bridge and die in order to be with him. And she responded, talk about an issue of control. Because she did understand it was an issue of control. So in the pain and the suffering, I spent 6 months here. I'm invited to live. It's 20 below zero when my son and daughter-in-law invite me to come to St. Louis. How do you say no to that, right? And I went, and then I stayed. I stayed with them for a week and a year. When I moved out, a couple months later, my third grandchild, Abigail, is born in April. And I am every day praying. My evening prayer is, please stop my breath. Please stop my breath. Please stop my breath. And then that's pain and suffering. It's to be expected. And then someone dear to me who has known me for most of my life said in a conversation, your pain is too heavy. Your grief is too heavy. And while she didn't mean cruelty, it was like a knife to my heart. And I continued to pray. Let me quit breathing. But God knew the moment. I spent 3 years from the time I move out. Abigail's third birthday rolls around, and I'm coming out of Celebrate Recovery, which I found very helpful in dealing with grief. And Abigail says, Grandma, Grandma. She's in my son's truck. Grandma, Grandma. I love birthdays. Birthdays are fun. Yes, Abigail, I was at your birthday. Grandma, Grandma, how many of my birthdays will you attend? Will you be at? That was the moment God knew. It was the place where I finally said, yes, Lord. And it still took me a long time. I counted the days. Not every day, but regularly. 2,290 days. And 80 days ago, I took off my wedding ring and truly started to live. With the Lord, there is unfailing love. The hope comes out of that story in that I continued to pray. I just discovered this Friday in a conversation with Tammy. Like, my hope was in that I believed enough in God, even though what I'm asking him for was horrific. I continued to pray. And he was faithful through little Abigail.
Hello. We were also asked to talk about our hope journey this morning. And I realized, just as we were sitting here, I think it was a year ago that we announced to church that we were expecting him, because I made a joke about a bun being in the oven, just like communion. Come on, buddy. All right. So for our hope journey, for those, most of you know, we had a miscarriage about 2 months after being married. Some of the hard part about that for me was we were not planning or expecting that to happen. And it came as a bit of a shock, and it was really, really scary for me because it was not my plan. And again, as things would have it, I remember we found out in between church and going up to the Polnazics' house for baptisms. And I'm piecing this all together now, but this celebration of life. So it took me about a week to finally settle into Christina being pregnant and me finally getting to a place where I said, okay, like, I'm ready for this. And then it was, I believe, about a day or two after when the miscarriage happened. And that's where the cruelty comes in for me. Then, probably about 2 years after that, we found out we were pregnant again. And I held back, being hopeful. I was scared to get my hopes up. And so it's been an interesting balance of understanding that, yes, God has big things in plan and better than I could have expected or hoped for. And I'm still scared to trust hope. Here you go, honey.
I think when Perry asked us to think about talking about our pain, suffering, or cruelty, and where hope was seen in that, I think some of the initial pain for me with the miscarriage, again, I felt betrayed by my body. I felt betrayed even by some of the things I heard around me of, we were very early in our pregnancy when we had that loss, and for some people, it's not even recognized as a life. And I think that it was easy to feel that our grief wasn't founded. Our grief wasn't, it wasn't enough to, feel sad, to feel the pain that we were going through. And I think kind of the lowest time I can think back to early on in our relationship, Pat and I did run together a little bit. That didn't last very long. I'm not a runner. Kind of did it just to have some bonding time together. But I remember a night we went out for a run together, and just Pat trying to reach out to comfort me as we're running. I'm crying, and I just remember running away from him, running as fast as I could, and just that pain kind of all coming down at once in that moment. I think the hope that transcended that, again, we had people in our lives that were speaking into us hope all the time. We had a physician that I was working with within that same year of losing the baby, and she was a believer. She's still our physician, and she reminded me each time I saw her or talked to her just that God had great plans for us. And she told me, she's like, I know one day I'm going to see you holding a baby. I'm going to see God's going to give you guys a child. And again, like Pat said, it was easy, I think, for us, even early on in the pregnancy with Jonathan, to not feel like we could hope. Just didn't want to get our hopes up. And I think the fact that for me, I think the fact that we kept seeking those relationships where people were speaking hope into our lives, and that includes you guys. And so I just really am thankful for the people that surrounded us, that God, and again, he was with us that entire time. So that is our story of pain and hope.
about now? Yep. If you would take out your sheets if you have one. Otherwise, it'll be up on the screen too. But I'd like to read this together. This is the Psalm 130. It's mentioned in the video. I mentioned a brief portion of it, but I want to read it out loud together, if we could. From the depths of despair, O Lord, I cry out for your help. Hear my cry, O Lord. Pay attention to my prayer. Lord, if you kept a record of our sins, who, O Lord, could ever survive? But you offer forgiveness, that we might learn to fear you. I am counting on the Lord. Yes, I am counting on him. I have put my hope in his word. I long for the Lord more than the centuries long for the dawn. Yes, more than the centuries long for the dawn. O Israel, hope in the Lord, for with the Lord there is unfailing love. His redemption overflows. He himself will redeem Israel from every kind of sin. Can I get Psalm 39:7? And so, Lord, where do I put my hope? My only hope is in you. Can I get our hope? For the first 12 years of our marriage, I was a Scrooge and a Grinch for Christmas. I was not really interested in celebrating, decorating, although I was here even, doing all of the churchy things at home. I was angry and resentful. And my father had died on Christmas Day a number of years before that. And it felt like it was a cloud on that day. About 7 years ago, I think, 6, I'm looking at my spouse to confirm, sometime more recently than later, God showed me that he had my dad's death happen on Christmas to remind me of the beginning of this redemption story. That Jesus' birth made it possible for my father to accept the offer of Jesus before he died. And I have been blessed so far for all of my mom, my father, and my 2 brothers. All had come to faith before they went on. And I'm prayerful that my remaining family will do the same. I don't think it's a coincidence that our community is going to be ending on Christmas, this part of it. And that I think God is showing me this redemption promise. It was for me personally. I'm hoping this might transcend to you as well. But we are celebrating the birth of Jesus. And during Advent, we're preparing room. We want to make room for what he has prepared for us. The word in the Greek elpis, is this living hope. It's a new and different way of being human. And Jesus models it. The Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, are his story of walking out this way of honoring God in a broken world and a vulnerable body. And there's no one who does it better. That's why I always use him as my ideal. It begins with a single person's humanity. Jesus. It begins with him. and it literally bleeds through to the rest of our community. With your permission, I might go a little long. I hope not to. I have the second song I want to play while we prepare for communion. So if whoever could help Pat build the preparation, I ask that you listen to the words while our preparers do their work. Can I have this? I have this hope.